Um, let's start, and we'll start with just a word of prayer as we did on Sunday night. Dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity that is ours to learn about legal issues that we may have faced or will face in the future. Thank you for Bob Burrow and his expertise in this area, and thank you for him coming to visit with us and giving us this hour of his time, his valuable time. May your spirit be here, a spirit of love and spirit of compassion for everyone. Bless us now, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Bob Burrow is the Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for Adventist Risk Management. And he went to graduate in business from Columbia Union College, now Washington Adventist University. And even though he was 10 years behind me, we had some of the same professors that were there forever. One of my esteemed psychology professors, his name was Dr. Schwint. And we know him very well. He taught me, I don't know, I've had 5 or 6 classes from him a long time ago. And Bob holds a Juris Doctor from the University of Maryland. And I sent out kind of an outline of all the topics that he's going to cover tonight. So he'll cover that in about the first half hour. On Tuesday night, he covered everything that was really important. And then he took questions for half an hour. And so we will look forward to that after his presentation. So if all of you would begin your videos. I know Lisa right at the bottom, she is driving home, but she's on, I think, with audio. But as soon as she gets home, she's going to come on to video. And there are a couple of others that are going to pop in. They're a little late. I got notification.
Oh, that's fine. No, that's no problem.
So, all right. So just a quick roundabout. Dulcie's from New Jersey. Candace is from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And Nicole is where? New Jersey as well, or New York City?
I'm from New York, work in New York.
She works in New York. And Lisa's muted, but I think, where does Lisa's in New York? I know she is. I think.
Nope, I'm in Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, yes. All right.
That's a great town, by the way.
Yeah, I like it.
Thanks, Lisa. We had the other night on Sunday night, we had 3 people from Ohio. So we were, anyway. All right, so Bob is going to give a presentation. And I appreciate, again, his time and his expertise. And go right ahead, Bob.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. And I've never been to Saskatchewan. I have been to Manitoba, BC, Alberta, and the eastern provinces, except the Maritimes. So I'm a sort of an honorary Canadian, but I've never been to Saskatchewan. So someday I hope to make it there. Ohio and New Jersey and New York I've been to, and lived in Jersey for a while. Exit 7 off of the turnpike for Bordentown. That's where we lived. So anyway, it's nice to see you all. I have great admiration for what you guys do. I mean, teaching is a hard task. You got a lot of responsibility, but it's also very rewarding. I mean, someday when you're old like me, you'll have some young man or young woman come up to you and say, you made a difference in my life, and you have to scratch your head and say, who was that? Can't remember that kid, but anyway, it can be very rewarding, but you're going to we live in a different world than my father, who was a pastor and a teacher, lived in. although it's really not different. It's just we have more challenges. You guys face things that my dad never faced. And I'm going to go through my outline very quickly just to kind of give you a primer of what I'd like to talk about. And some of these things you'll not recognize, but a lot of them you will. A lot of them you've already seen, a lot of them you've already experienced. And truth be told, if you haven't, you will at some point in your career. But just quickly, I'm with Adventist Risk Management. We deal with most of the litigation in the North American division against church entities. So when conferences get sued, when schools get sued, and churches and such, we're generally managing the defense of that. We've had a lot of stuff in New York, you ladies from New York, with Greater New York and Northeastern. It's not anything about those conferences. They're both very well run, but you have that many people packed together in that small area, and you're going to have lawsuits and controversy. So we do get up there on the train quite a bit. It's always a great train ride, both to and from. But all of your issues that you have in the law with respect to students and things that can go wrong, there will always be an accusation of inadequate supervision. That comes from everything: a fight in the playground, a sexual abuse case, a trip and fall. They're going to say you didn't supervise the children very well. This overlays with all the behavioral issues you're going to deal with that come to a head. When you're dealing with the supervision, you want to deal with numbers. You don't want one teacher looking after 75 students. The numbers are just too great. You can't have eyes in the back of your head. Engagement. A lot of cases I've handled have dealt with issues of engagement with supervision where, and no offense, I'm not trying to badmouth teachers. I'm a product of you guys. I got educated by you guys. So, the engagement, meaning paying attention, not being on your phone. You ever watch a lifeguard at the beach? You go up to the lifeguard, hey, how's the surf today? They never look at you. They're always scanning the waves, right? So that's what you want to be doing. Sight lines are important. If you're an elementary teacher, particularly at recess, can you see where all the kids are? Or are there sight lines where you can't see them? Is there a hedgerow, or is there a shed, or is there something where you can't see the children? You got to eliminate those, or get more eyes on the situation. Transitions. What do I mean by that? Leaving the school and coming back into the school from recess, or coming and going in the morning. These are times when things happen. Pushing or shoving in line, not even fights, but one kid will trip another kid just to be funny, and a kid will crack a tooth on the sidewalk or something. Between classes, those transitions can give rise to these type of issues as well as dismissal. Dismissal's even probably the worst time, because sometimes there's delays in dismissal of rides coming and whatnot. And then you get into the issues with school capability with supervision. You have learning challenged children, and you have mentally challenged children, emotionally challenged children. They require a higher degree of supervision. And sometimes we take on children, we don't know that they may have a mental or emotional or a learning disability, and it isn't revealed on the application. And you get 6 months into the school year and you discover a child has special needs that you guys can't handle. You don't have the staff, you don't have a resource teacher or something like that. So those are issues as well. Then we move into sexual issues, LGBTQ students, parents, and community members. Our church is struggling with how to minister to LGBTQ people. We don't really do it very well. I think we want to do it well, but we don't. We're kind of, you have the Law and Order type, and then you have the anything goes grace type. And, I don't know. I think the balance is somewhere in the middle. But we want children in our schools. We want young people to get introduced to Jesus in our schools. And that includes kids who may, be grappling with their sexual identity. And it may include kids that come from same-sex parent situations. With same-sex parent situations, you want full disclosure. we had a lesbian couple come to the school. I'm on the board, and they wanted to enroll their daughter, and everyone's wringing their hands. You know, what do we do? Well, I think what we do is we tell them what we are and who we are. You know, we don't hate you. We're not trying to judge you, but we believe that a marriage is between one man and one woman. And your daughter will be taught that at some point. It's not something that's written, you know, inscribed into the cinder block on the wall, but it is something that in Bible class, it'll come up. And if she's in high school, she'll learn it, and they have like a marriage and the family thing. That's where they're going to hear it. And while we don't disrespect you, this is what we are, who we are, and what we believe. If you still want to send your daughter, we want her, you know. And see, these are the kind of conversations that it's best to have from the get-go, because then they know they don't have, there's no, oh, but I thought you people loved each other. You know, yes, we do, but we also have certain standards that we live by. There is same-sex dating. I didn't always have a date to the banquets I went to in high school. So I'd go what they call stag with the guys. It wasn't same-sex dating, but in nowadays it's kind of hard to, the line's a little blurry nowadays. Okay. Couples, same thing. PDAs, public displays of affection. There is a point, my father used to tell me, there's a point in an adolescent girl's development where they get very huggy. And he was the principal of a school, and he said, I can't let this go on. They can't hug me. I can't do that. That's not right. Or they'll walk down the hall holding hands. You've seen this with middle school girls sometimes. That's part of development. At least it used to be. Now, you know, you're dealing with, is this a homosexual kind of thing? I don't know the answer to that, but these are things you're going to grapple with. Okay. And then the most difficult thing about the LGBTQ issues is a child or a young person coming into the school and advocating sort of political or societal ideas that are in opposition of church teachings. And that's something that's even harder to deal with than the PDAs and the walking down the hall holding hands and things. But again, it's an issue that you're going to have to grapple with. Kid comes in and says, you know, why does the church not believe that homosexual marriage is okay? You're haters, you're backward, you're, whatever the adjective is. And so these are difficult issues that you'll have to deal with young people and parents. And we're not exempt as SDAs. We live in the world we live in, and we're influenced by the culture, there's also issues that you come up with where there's sexual harassment of teachers by students, particularly female teachers. A high school senior, I've had cases where a high school senior was harassing a young female teacher, and the employer has to deal with that. It doesn't matter whether the harasser is a kid. So these are things you'll have to deal with as well as administrators, as teachers. You may have experienced it. I don't know. And I'm not asking for, any kind of discussion on that, but it is something that's out there. Then we move to student privacy, school records, FERPA. Now in the United States, there's a federal law called FERPA. It's designed to protect student privacy of student records. I deal with it most of the time because our schools in the US get subpoenas, mainly in divorce cases. Give us all of my son's records. Under FERPA, I have to contact, if it's the husband issuing and serving the subpoena, in the United States, I have to contact the wife's lawyer or the wife if she's unrepresented and give her an opportunity to object to the subpoena. So FERPA has a lot of ins and outs, and I know I looked at your syllabus. You're going to be covering this. It's a good thing to know. I do not know. I know in Canada you have similar laws. I'm not as familiar with them, and I apologize. But the Canadian government tends to be more concerned with citizen privacy than here in the United States. You may think that good, you may think that bad, but it's certainly true. I think anyone would understand that. There are state and provincial laws as well, not just federal laws. Each state has their own spin, and province in Canada, on student privacy. Health records are an issue, privacy of health records. And this is becoming a big deal with the whole COVID vaccine thing. Can we ask for proof of vaccination? Well, here in the US, you can. And in some provinces in Canada, I don't know about Saskatchewan, but in some provinces, you can in Canada as well. There's lots of arguments on both sides. But again, these are issues you'll be facing. IT issues. We've had cases where IT professionals have brought in student help. I know you got to do more with less in SDA education. Sometimes you don't have the budget for another FTE in the IT department. But if you're going to bring in a young person, you got to be careful what data they have access to. And it's not that they're untrustworthy or they're bad people or anything, but do you really want grades out there or discipline records? Because these are their buddies, you know. And we've had cases, okay? We've had cases where this has been an issue. So, and let's talk about admissions into the school. Person comes and they fill out an application. I'd like to bring my child to your school. Make that a quick turnaround. We've had issues where there's silence, they pay the admission fee or their application fee. August comes along and it's like, no, we're not going to take your child because they have a behavioral issue or something. And then mom or dad is caught flat-footed. They're gasping. They're like, oh, what we were counting on bringing our child. Had litigation over it. They don't succeed in the litigation, but it just, if you get that done, if you have deadlines and you have deadlines for the application committee to consider, it's a good idea. Okay, yeah, and be able to explain delays if you have them, if you need more information, and state the reasons for denial. We want kids in our schools. We want our schools to be bursting at the seams. But if there is a kid that you can't provide what they need, don't hesitate to say, listen, mom, listen, dad, we don't have the resources. Your child has a their ADHD or they have another learning disability, and we don't have the resources to deal with it or to help your child. That's fair. That's fair. They may not like it, but it's fair. Then there are domestic issues in school families, divorce, custody battles. There are many times when a husband and wife who are breaking apart try to make school the arena for the combat. And your job is to push back. Your job is to educate their child, not to solve mom and dad's domestic problems. One parent disapproves of SDA education in some situations. I don't want my kid going to that school. Those people are a bunch of cultists, you know. I mean, and no, we don't want that. You know, I want them in the public school. They're going to get a much better education there. Well, you know. And sometimes this is what they really believe, and sometimes it's just an idea of they want to, you know, they're trying to battle mom or battle dad over this issue instead of fighting over what really needs to be fought over. School records with the non-custodial parent. Check your local state laws. Have a policy. You know, I like the policy of whoever's financially responsible gets access to the records, but there are some states and provinces that give the non-custodial parent rights as well. And what you get is this is what you typically get. Mom brings her kids and enrolls them in school. 3 years later, some guy calls on the phone claiming to be the children's father and wants all the records for the last 3 years and wants to cross-examine the teacher. Believe me, I've had this. And they call, what do we do? What do we do? Here's what you do. Do you have RenWeb? Or do you have some system like that? Give him a RenWeb account and tell him he can come to parent-teacher conference if he wants, or if he has a particular thing, the teacher has 20 minutes on the 15th, you know, after school. But you do not give you get this, oh, I want it all in writing. No, you'll have access to the records and you can speak to the teacher for a time. but you don't get unfettered access and the ability to harass the teacher constantly. And that's what you get sometimes, you know. So, you know, those are things you need help with. You call myself, you call local attorney, you call somebody at your conference. You need help with that. Don't go that alone. Don't go that alone, you know. Pick up and drop off. Have a policy and have authorized people to pick up the child. It can be Aunt Matilda. It can be Uncle Joe. It can be grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or whomever. But hold on just a second. Stop. I'm in a meeting. So, you know, that's what you need to do on that, on the hold on, drop off. Oh yeah, transcripts we've talked about. Now, some schools won't release a transcript if the bill isn't paid. Okay. If you're going to do that, have a policy and put it in the handbook and disclose it at the beginning of the relationship. Your transcript will not be released unless your bill is current or you make other arrangements with the principal. Some states and provinces don't permit that. So check with your local laws again. Yeah, court orders and visitation schedules. You're not in charge of enforcing the court orders. You're not in charge of their visitation schedules. In other words, you don't, you know, somebody will come and they'll want to pick up the child and the child will be late or something. Don't get involved in that. Don't get involved in that. Tell the parents they're going to have to work that out. And then TROs and peace orders. TRO is a temporary restraining order. If you have violence in the home, a spouse will go to the court and he or she will say, I need a temporary restraining order against my spouse. They're hitting me or whatever the violent act may be. And then what you'll get is a phone call saying, I have a restraining order against my husband or my wife, so he can't come to the school. Again, you're not in charge. You don't want violence going on at the school, but you're not in charge of enforcing the TRO. So what you tell them is, okay, both of you are going to have to set up a schedule where you don't come to the school at the same time. Okay. So these things get tricky. I know I'm not in I don't live in an ivory tower. I'm not like, oh, you can just wave your magic wand and make it happen, but you can't let them drag you into this stuff because your job is to educate their child. Student discipline, you have behavioral codes, discipline standards, all that should be published. And there should be a process of imposing discipline that's published. If you're going to give a parent an appeal from a discipline action, that process should be published and you should stick to it. I'm not a big fan of appeals for anything but like the nuclear option, that being expulsion. If a kid is in detention, I don't think they get an appeal from that, or you're going to be appealed to the day is long. That being said, I think if you're going to toss a kid out of school for a disciplinary issue, that probably should have an appeal process. You want to involve your board, and have a tight window for that. Don't drag it out for 6 months. A lot of times these kids have to either get reinstated or they need to enroll somewhere else. And so you got to make it a tight window for the appeal time-wise. Expulsion, you have student behavior, of course, can lead to expulsion, but you also have parental behavior. Parental behavior is the kid's fine, but the parent is such a pain in the neck that you just can't abide them anymore. So the kid's got to go. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. You guys have probably seen that, where it's not the child that's the issue, but so you know that's okay. You're allowed to do that. Again, it's heartbreaking. We don't want to turn our back on children, but if the parent is harassing a teacher or a staff member or something, these things happen. So your student handbook should be up to date with your rules, with your behavioral codes. with things about sexuality, with policies about all of these things I've talked about. And then I'm just going to close with my presentation with hot button issues. Cell phones are hot button issues. You know, all the bullying. When I was a kid, bullying was, you know, you go into the boys' room and 3 kids come out and they smash you up against the wall and maybe punch you a few times or kick you, or, you know, take your book and throw it in the toilet or something. I mean, you know, these kind of things. It's gross, but you know, now you have these phones 24/7. And there have been kids who have committed suicide over the harassment and bullying they get on these phones. And it's tragic. I mean, I was never really bullied all that much, but I got pushed around a little bit. Every kid does. I'd come home and that'd be the end of it. I'd shut the door. That would be it. Now they're tethered to this stuff. So it's a different world. LGBTQ issues, which we've touched on, free speech issues. I have the right to express my opinion. Well, it's an academic place. You do want people to be able to think outside the box and speak freely, but there are some restrictions on that. There are some things that are not allowed to be said. You're not allowed to use profanity or take the name of the Lord in vain, or disrespect the teacher, or, you know, what have you. I mean, but that should all be spelled out in your handbook. And then lawyers' involvement. I put that in there because I've had situations. Listen, my parents are both deceased and they both went to their graves, probably having visited a lawyer 3 times. A couple times to close on houses that they purchased over the years, and once to do wills. If I got in trouble in school, there would not even be, seeing a lawyer would not even be on the drop-down menu of what should we do with Bobby. Okay. Wouldn't even be there. So nowadays, different story. We have lawyers who want to come to the discipline hearing and everything. Again, put it in your handbook. No lawyers. Lawyers, all they do, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm not saying we're bad people, but there's a reason there's a lot of lawyer jokes. Okay. And one thing they do is take things over. And they're better at questioning people and backing you into a corner than you are. So you don't want them there. This is your discipline process has to be cleaner than that. If the parent wants to come, fine, but not their lawyer. So with that, I have concluded. Just a quick run through my outline. I'm happy to just discuss issues, field questions, and answer them if I can. Discuss anything you want on your. I am not a teacher. I'm not a teacher. But I've dealt with a lot of teachers, particularly in NAD, and although I'm not a teacher, there's certain things I've been able to experience and help navigate that may be a benefit to you.
All right. Don't be afraid to unclick your mic and ask any question that might be of interest and important to you.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Thank
Good
you so
evening.
much. I learned so much listening to you, but I want to ask a question on that last point you said about no lawyers in the handbook.
Okay.
How would that sound like, you know, like in a policy, like under, you said you would put it under discipline, or if you could just
Yes.
me a little bit more, I can get more clarity.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I was trying to get through it quickly, and so I probably left some things off, and I appreciate your question. It generally falls under discipline, where you have, for the serious discipline issues, you know, you have some type of a discipline committee. There are times when a student and or his or her parent will come before the discipline committee. That's where it would be. Just say this is an administrative process with that's, you know, designed to be redemptive, and therefore that neither the school nor the student or his parents will have counsel representing them at such a hearing or such a meeting. I wouldn't even call it a hearing because that sounds kind of like onerous, but it kind of is. I mean, a lot of times it's not as much about evidence as it is about attitude. You know, I mean, what is the kid contrite? Does the kid realize that he or she did something wrong, and are they willing to try to change? I mean, that would be. When I was in high school, I was a bit of a surly lad, you know, And the point being is that if I went and I did go before discipline committee a few times, and I exhibited an attitude where truthfully, I wouldn't have given me much of a break. We had some Christian people on the committee who saw past my 15-year-old surliness and gave me some chance. And that's what you guys do too. You do that. You spend a lot of time praying for these kids, so, but the attitude is more important than what happened. Look, you guys know what happened before the kid even sets foot before the committee. You know what happened. You don't need, this isn't a fact-finding thing. You're trying to gauge, does this child want to be here? Is this child gonna make an attempt to conform? So that's where it'd be. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, someone else. I heard or thought I saw a hand or a voice. Please feel free to ask questions.
Hi, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
I have several questions. My first question is, there's so many things that you mentioned that needs to be in a handbook, basically just to protect ourselves. And I know that we're in the process of redoing our handbook at school. And I just feel like a lot of the things that you mentioned, we haven't even touched on. So how do we get access to information that tells us those things that we really should, that's really important from a legal standpoint of being in a handbook? Is there somewhere we can go for that?
Yeah, you are in the Atlantic Union. Are you with the Greater New York, Northeastern, or Southern New England, or where?
No, I'm in Columbia Union. I'm in Allegheny, Wisconsin.
Oh, you're in Allegheny. Oh, so you're in Columbia Union. Well, then you need to talk to Donovan, and I don't know his last name, but at the union.
Donovan Ross.
Yeah.
Yes, I know Donovan, but I always just call him Donovan, so I didn't know his last name. And Jacqueline Messenger, both of those very, from my perspective, I have a great deal of regard for them. I've worked with them on many things. Those guys will help you craft and include they also have an attorney on their staff at Columbia Union who is also a woman named Lisa, is my better half, and she will help you as well.
Oh.
And she better do a good job, but yeah, so yeah, you have resources. I do not know your educational superintendent. Now, I'm just going to ask you a little sidebar here. Where's Jermaine now? Did he leave Allegheny West, Jermaine Jackson?
Yes, he did. I think, I don't think he's in conference work at all. I think he moved to the New Jersey area, but I wasn't clear that he was still in conference work.
Well, I'll have to reach out to him. He's a friend, so I sort of keep a loose tab, but at any rate, yeah, you have resources, but I don't know your educational superintendent in West. But I'm sure he or she could help you as well with that.
Yeah,
but I
she's actually new.
Okay.
She's actually new, and she was supposed to be interim, but we keep people in interim for a very long time. Yeah. So this is our third year in interim.
Yeah.
So I can reach out to her, and I know she works very closely with the principal. But I think because she's new and our principal's new, our options would probably be best going to Donovan Ross. So thank you for that.
Donovan's a great guy, and Jacqueline Messenger as well. You got some real resources there to help you with. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I did have a second question. At the beginning, you talked about this whole supervision thing. And in our schools, we are limited with staffing. So it becomes really tricky when teachers have to leave the room for a second, just to go to the bathroom with supervision.
Yeah, I know.
What are our options for getting around those kind of things and with limited staff? And I don't know how to fix those issues, but I do know it's a big issue.
there are not always fixes, because we are asked in SDA work generally, but in SDA education in particular, to do more with less. And you guys do an excellent job, but there are some things. The only thing I can tell you is there are sometimes, I don't know, and I know a lot of teachers. I'm friends with a lot of teachers in my own community here in DC suburbs. That said, I don't know how you do it, because, we all need to, have a comfort break every once in a while. And that being said, I think there's a couple of ways to handle it. Sometimes you need to just go and leave them. I don't advocate that, but sometimes you do. Other times, if you have like a school receptionist, or the principal has an administrative assistant, you can have the admin maybe sit in for a few moments while you use the restroom. There are sometimes responsible older children. Are you in a K through 8 or K through 10 or 12 school?
I'm sorry, I was walking into my house, so I missed that. Would you say that again?
No problem. No, are you in a K to 8 or K to 12 or school?
K to 8.
Okay, so you're not going to have older students who could come in and watch the children. At 8th grade there are some 8th graders that are mature, but they're still kind of in middle school. So I think that would be the best thing to do, is to have the admin rotate through at various times during the day when teachers can, have a little break. I mean, because everybody has to use the facilities during the day, and you shouldn't be, but I think there are times when you may just have to leave them. And I hate to say that because it goes against everything I think, but there is sometimes, and I will tell you that there are times when, that it's like driving, and the one, 999 times out of 1,000, nothing's going to happen. But the one time, that's the problem. And so I don't advocate for that, but I think I would talk to your principal and say, look, if you have an admin or a receptionist or something, that they need to have some sort of communication deal where you can call on them to, take 5 or 10 minutes and have them just sit in there and supervise the children while you're down the hall. That's the only solution I have, because you can't hire somebody, to do that. So
Lisa, do you have a teacher next door that could open the door on both classrooms and kind of?
It's another solution.
I was a superintendent for 7 years, and boy, that's the time when things happen, when you least expect it, and you leave children unattended. Anyway.
That is typically what we do. We have a closet in between the classes, and I'll say to the other teacher, look, would you watch my kids? I'll be right back.
Yeah.
And it's only in extreme cases.
Yeah.
But I do get concerned because I teach the smaller ones, and at any minute they could do anything.
You're right. You gotta watch them like a hawk. All right, any other questions? Because we only have about 6 minutes. Janina, Nicole, Candace up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Lydia, just quick, make it quick.
Yeah, I have a question regarding not allowing lawyers at a meeting.
Yeah.
What do we do if a parent say that I didn't know such rule was in the handbook? When you tell them, you're not allowed to bring a lawyer in, and they tell you they didn't know that was in the handbook. As administrators, should we make sure that every parent sign when they get the handbook? Is that it?
Well, and you should make sure every parent receives either a physical or an electronic copy of the handbook, and to verify it. And I would also, early on in the discipline process, if you're going to have some type of a meeting involving discipline, I think I would remind them to review the policy. I have this at times when there's a policy that I know is going to be at issue in a particular proceeding. I'll send it to the person and say, look, you need to review this. These are the ground rules that we're going to have. This is, and if they say, there's two kind of people that bring lawyers to the discipline committee. There's those who are trying to ambush you, essentially. I'm going to bring in my snarling, slobbering Doberman Pinscher to make sure everything goes my way. And I mean, we had a situation some years ago in a school that I dealt with where they had a lot of students from overseas who were very wealthy. And they all got into some hot water discipline wise about some immoral acts, and there was a hearing, and about every lawyer in this one city, half of them whom I knew, shows up. And I told them, I says, no, you're not. I'm not in there. I'm not going in there. You're not going. And nobody's, it's due process. It's the U.S. Constitution and all that. No. This is a private school. This is a private school, and this is a administrative proceeding. Well, they have nobody here. Their parents are halfway around the world. That was tough because what you can do is you can say, look, the parent can come. So what we did, it was in the era of electronic, like what we're doing tonight. Mom and dad could be on the thing. The problem is mom and dad didn't speak English. So it was not, it was suboptimal, but I wasn't going to have every lawyer from every law firm in the city. You know what that would have turned into.
But you know what though? What if the parent is a lawyer?
You gotta let the parent in. So if the parent's a lawyer, then you're out of luck, That was a good question. You're all right, man. I can tell you that was all right. Then you're out of luck, I'm afraid.
Yeah. You need two lawyers then.
Right. Well, mom or dad is going to wear their mommy or their daddy hat, not their advocate hat. And, they'll come in with some skills that your typical parent doesn't have, but at the same time, they are the child's parent. So you got to let them in. So,
You had mentioned that a private school. What about schools that receive public funding? How does that complicate anything procedurally?
Both in Canada and the US, there are some public funds made available to schools, and I don't know how. Yes, and that will require you, and particularly with the LGBTQ issues, you're going to have more state intervention. You may have to, create the big thing now in the States is, do we address them by their preferred pronouns? Do we have a bathroom for, I'm not sure how you'd use restroom facilities. I think part of that, the pronoun thing is something that I recoil at, because I think it's a butchering of the English language. But the bathroom thing, I'm not as steeped in. I think if we have unisex bathrooms, one toilet bathrooms, now that may be impractical, or at least have some one toilet bathrooms for a child who, truthfully, if you had one toilet bathrooms, there'd be a lot less chance for mischief of hetero, homo, bisexual, whatever. It would eliminate a lot of this stuff, just to be honest with you. That being said, when you take public funds, and I know they do this in most of the Western world, even in the United States. New Zealand is totally, you guys would be paid by the state in New Zealand, that you would be a government employee teaching in an SDA school, and there would be some of the saints here in the US and Canada would just be beside themselves to hear that. But that's how it's done there, and I don't criticize them. I have this theory. I think when the governments want to shut our schools down, it ain't going to mean a hill of beans of difference whether we took their money or not.
Mhm.
And that's my opinion.
I can testify to that.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So the point being is that you will have to deal with local council to make sure you're complying Now, there'll come a point where compliance may be against your principles, against the church principles. I don't know. But a lot of the homosexual, and Barry can probably speak to this better than I am because he is in Canada and he practices in Canada, but it falls under their hate speech codes, and we haven't gotten that far on down that road in the United States, but we take money from the federal government and from state governments more indirectly here in the States than they do in Canada. And there are pitfalls that you can get involved in. We had a Title IX case, which is the United States law about gender equality. And it used to be when Title IX was passed, it was about the girls get the same athletic facilities as the boys. And who would argue with that? They should get access to the soccer field, soccer uniforms, all that. Title IX has morphed into something much larger than that, with a lot of procedures and processes that our local elementary schools have no idea of. And they took some of the COVID money, and this is in Florida, and they had a Title IX claim. And the hook, it's ongoing, the hook was that they took the COVID money. So, and I'm not against taking the COVID money. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here banging the drum about, oh no, you shouldn't take the COVID money. What I am saying is that you need to know what you're getting into. And if you're going to be subject to Title IX and whatever the Canadian equivalent of that is, you just need to understand that you need to be prepared to follow the processes that are required by that legislation. It's easy to take the money, but you got to read the thing. That a lot of the conferences, they didn't even read what they're getting into, or have counsel read it. That would be even better. Have counsel read it and give you the synopsis. So anyway, I hope that it does affect it.
All right. Well, thank you again, Bob. I really, we have learned a lot over the last Sunday night and tonight again, and we had good questions. And so thank you very much for joining our class for an hour.
Absolutely.
And I'll write you and talk again with you about our session tonight. So thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one, Barry. Good
Thank
to see
you.
again.
Yeah, we're gonna turn now to Dr. Burrow Bussey. And what I usually take a break, but I think we'll just motor on for a few minutes. If you need to take a bathroom break, just stop the video and slip away. We've only got an hour and we've used 5 minutes already of it. So let me introduce Dr. Burrow Bussey, good friend of mine. His wife, Lavana, we have 3 sons. Our youngest son just turned 41. When he was about 8 or 9, Lavana, Barry's wife, was his music teacher. And so we go back a long ways in Newfoundland. Barry is a theology graduate from Burman University, which is the Canadian university, Adventist Canadian University. And he also has an LLB, Bachelor of Laws, from the University of Western Ontario. He has a master's degree in political science from Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. And he has another master's from the University of Waterloo and a PhD from, and I'm going to butcher this, you said it, and I tried to remember, Leiden?
Yeah, Leiden.
Leiden. Now, I, did some research because I'd never heard of this university in the Netherlands. And this is this is the 75th or 76th ranked world-class university. It beats my alma mater, the University of Alberta. We're up around, I don't know, 99 or 100 or something like that. Anyway, it's a really academic institution. We could get into asking Dr. Bussey how he did all this, and he's a scholar. His brother, whom I used to play hockey with 25 years ago, said that Barry had all the brains in the family, and I don't know, but he is proficient in religion and philosophy and law, and he's going to talk about a particular case in Canada. But it has I like the way he wove in things that, and he has good friends in the US, because there was an interest, a real strong interest from people in the US, and he can mention that. But so I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Barry Bussey, and thank you for your time, Barry. And this is a group of students, right? I'll just go through them. Dulce is in New Jersey. Down here, Janina Mann is in Miami, Florida. Below me, at least on my screen, is Lydia Levy, and she is you're in Ohio.
What part of Ohio?
Columbus.
Okay.
Columbus, and Lisa's from.
My son is in Dayton area. He's in the Kettering Hospital network.
Oh, very good. Wow. Next to her is Lisa Lavalas. She is from Ohio.
Okay.
Below her is Nicole. Nicole is from New York City. And way at the top, our lone Canadian tonight. All of the Canadians were on Sunday's broadcast. Candace is from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Okay, very good.
So welcome again, Barry, and we'll just motor on.
Sure.
And
well,
go for it.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. Great to be here with you and talk about a case that I have maintained in my writings, to which I'm sure that if I were ever to meet any of the Supreme Court judges who were in the majority decision, would not appreciate my view. But it's the worst decision ever, in my view, in the history of Canadian legal jurisprudence. It involved a Christian university out in British Columbia, and in Langley, which is just east of Vancouver. It's a Christian university by the Free Church. Anyhow, I had the name. I was going to do it tonight, but anyhow, it's slipped me again. Okay, but it's a church-based university that maintained very stringent controls, as it were, rules, which, of course, those of us who've attended Adventist schools, certainly in the academy, would understand what many of those rules would be, with alcohol, smoking, et cetera, et cetera. And but one of the rules that has caught the attention of Canadian society has been that of dealing with the issue of sex, which, of course, is always an issue that is very much a topic of discussion. And what happened was they defined marriage in their covenant that they expected people to not engage in sexual activities while they were students. That would be in violation of the definition outside of the institution of marriage, and the definition of marriage was one man and one woman, and that was, of course, the controversy. Now, so I'll just kind of go through this a wee little bit, but I just want to point out that this decision, which came down in 2019, June 15, 2018, a day of infamy as far as I'm concerned, and that day should be named for the Freedom of Religion Day for Canada. And I'll explain to you why I have such a dislike for this case. The in time, but understand that this was a long process, and it goes back to the mid 1990s when the university wanted to have an education degree. And so the way it worked was that for 3 years, the students at Trinity Western University, TWU, would go to Trinity, and then afterwards they would go to Simon Fraser University, where they would finish one more qualifying year to get a Bachelor of Education degree. So 3 years at TWU, another year then at the public university, and they would finish up and get a education degree. Well, Trinity, as it was growing, decided it wanted to have an education degree and have it proper, so that full 4 years would be for their students. So they made an application to the BC College of Teachers, and the college decided that no, they would not grant accreditation because of what they deemed to be discriminatory practice of the school, requiring students to sign on the dotted line that they agreed to the covenant, which included this definition of, well, at that point in early 90s, it didn't mention marriage per se, but it did mention, I think it just said extramarital sex or whatever. But back then in the 90s, there was no worries because the definition of marriage, like, I mean, it just wasn't in the language, as it were. So the case went all the way up. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the College of Teachers were concerned that the teachers who would come out of that education program, when they got into the public school system and taught, they would discriminate against any LGBT student, and that this would be totally unacceptable because they could not see how graduates of a Christian religious school would be able to be anything but discriminatory in their views and in their opinions when they were in the public school system. Now, what happened is that the Supreme Court ruled that in 2001, ruled that Trinity Western should be given accreditation because it said that Trinity Western is not for everyone, that it's a religious school. And as a religious school, it is exempt from the human rights legislation that regulates whether or not individuals can discriminate, because obviously discrimination is not something that is permitted. But there are exceptions, and one of those exceptions are religious institutions. And this, being a religious institution, was exempted from the human rights legislation. Okay, so so then we now come into the 2000s, 20 years later, and the school, it's growing. It's got like, I think it's something like 5,000 students now.
Yep. Yeah.
And it now wants to have a law school. And there's always something about, you know, universities expanding and wanting to move into law, move into medicine, those kinds of fields. And they thought, okay, they would go into and open up a law school. And this law school would be the first law school in Canadian history that you would have as an evangelical university having a law school. All of the law schools in Canada are run by public institutions. There's not one private law school in Canada. And so this was a dramatic move. Now, the way it works is that in Canada, much in the same way as in the United States, where you have individual state bars that authorize who can take the state bar, and in Canada it would be the provincial bar. And so all of the provinces have their own law societies. And these law societies make determination as to whether or not a particular degree is acceptable for the student to be able to write the local bar. And what they did was throughout the 2000s, they decided they were going to, instead of having all of the bars make individual decisions of every new law school that is coming online, that they would put it all to the national body of law societies, which is known as the Federation of Law Societies of Canada. And that body would look into any new law school that was coming into being, look at it, make sure that its curriculum and everything that it was doing was going to meet the standards for all of the law societies to allow these graduates from that school to be able to write the bar. Now, on that board of the National Federation of Law Societies were pretty much all of the deans of the law schools. Now, just to kind of give you a little bit of context, Canada has English common law, but we also have French civil law. So we have in the province of Quebec, which is about 9 million people living in the province of Quebec. Canada has about 38 million people. So it's a fairly large portion of Canadian society that is under the civil code, or the French civil code, which is a very different system of law than our English common law, which is English common law is the normal process down in the United States as well, although you do have a wee little bit of French down in the New Orleans area, where there is this civil code to a small degree, which I don't have much knowledge on, other than I know it exists down there. This was going to be a common law, English common law school. And all of the deans who were sitting on the board said, no, we don't really like this idea because of the religious nature of the law school, because of the fact that it's going to require the students to commit on the community covenant that they're not going to engage in sex outside of marriage defined as one man and one woman. And they felt that was discriminatory. And then they petitioned the Federation to set up a special committee to look into whether or not the graduates of Trinity Western's education program, which was 20 years previous, just about, whether they were discriminating against LGBT students in the school systems. They also investigated the law and so forth with respect to whether or not we could have a religious school like this be a law school and so forth. And what happened as well is that the faculties of all of the English common law schools all voted in their faculty meetings, student basically unrest and petitioning the Federation to not allow TWU to have a law school. There were literally if not millions of dollars were spent on all kinds of investigations and also getting legal opinions from the top constitutional lawyers across the country. And every single opinion came down in favor of Trinity. And what was interesting is that ultimately the Federation held a vote, and they voted that Trinity would be an acceptable law school in Canada so that its graduates would be able to write the bar. Well, that sent off an even greater firestorm, because now things was all that much more ratcheted up, and people were thinking the end of the world had arrived to the Canadian institutions, because certainly how will Canadian society ever have a religious graduate from Trinity University ever sit on the court. And that was one of the big things, that lawyers become judges. And how could we even think that these people would ever be able to sit on the bench eventually? So anyhow, then the movement was that the various law professors wrote very strong arguments using American law, in particular the Bob Jones University Law School case, Bob Jones University case, which dealt with, of course, discriminatory segregation issues at Bob Jones University and whether or not it would receive charitable status. And so the idea is that if government grants a special status, then it would be then implicated by the teachings of that institution to which it granted the status. So in other words, IRS would be in essence taking on the discriminatory nature of and approving of this discrimination that would occur at the Bob Jones University. That was the argument. And therefore, using the parallel in Canada was, well, if the Law Society, if the Federation of Law Societies and all of the various law societies were to accept Trinity Western, then they would be tainted by the discriminatory behavior and the teachings of the university with respect to marriage. So all of the various law bars, all of the provincial bars, then were holding meetings and were voting whether or not to accept the students from Trinity. 3 provinces voted against accepting students from Trinity. They were the province of Nova Scotia in the east, the province of Ontario, which is by far the largest province population-wise in the country. It has well over 11 to 15 million people. I can't remember which, but anyhow, it's quite a large group of society, and also the home province of Trinity Western, which is British Columbia. Now, what's interesting about British Columbia is that they had at first accepted and voted to accept Trinity students to write the bar, but because of the activists within the membership of the Law Society, they forced the board, the benchers is what we call them, but they're basically board members, but they're known as the benchers, to change its mind. And so what it said was, it's decided to hold a referendum. And given the political incorrectness of a religious school, it is not surprising that Trinity Western lost that referendum amongst the lawyers of the province, and they all said no to Trinity. And then the board or the benchers changed its mind and said, okay, we won't accept these students. Then eventually it makes its way, it goes through a very, as court cases do, it takes a number of years to make its way to the Supreme Court. And finally in 2018, the Supreme Court on June 15 decided that the law societies were in, they were given deference to deny the school accreditation so that no graduate from TW would be able to write the bar, and therefore the school is at an end. So now the school didn't actually begin as of yet. It was simply trying to get the accreditation. That it had all of the plans, all of the architectural work for the new building that was going to be put up on the university. They had been fundraising, all the rest of it, but you know, they never got to put the shovel in the ground. So as you go through the decision of the Supreme Court, what we see here is a court that's very much influenced by the political reality on the ground rather than the law itself. Because remember, all of the constitutional lawyers of the country who gave opinions to the Law Federation had said that, in their opinion, the law is very clear that Trinity is entitled to have a law school, and the graduates would be entitled to write the bar. So then, how did the Supreme Court come to the conclusion that the law societies were entitled to deny Trinity accreditation? And I should just point out an interesting little, to me, what was a foreshadowing of the kind of decision we were going to have, was that the courts in Canada, as in the United States as well, allow interested parties to intervene or file briefs. In the United States, they're known as the amicus brief. In Canada, we call it the whole process, the interventions, and we file factums, which is similar to the brief. And so there were something like 20 different groups that were applying for intervention status in this case, because it was such a powerful and important case. The justice who's now our Chief Justice, Justice Wagner, decided he would only allow in 9 interveners. None of them were members of the LGBT community. And because there were no decisions given as to why he decided not to allow the others. The group that I represented, we were denied. The Canadian Centre for Christian Charities, which is, we've got 3,500 charities around the country. So we were denied, as many others were. But interestingly enough, the Adventist Church was granted status in that intervention. Then, so the decision came down on Thursday night to decide who would be able to intervene. By Monday morning, the then Chief Justice, Justice McLaughlin, she issued an order allowing everyone in. And so what happened between Thursday night and Monday morning? There's a social media outfit known as Twitter. And Twitter absolutely exploded. All of the various activist groups in the LGBT community just were absolutely irate. They were going to storm the steps of the Supreme Court. They were calling for everyone across the country to come to Ottawa, and they were going to really make a scene, because none of their groups were brought in as interveners. Now, what of course is interesting is that all of the law societies in the case were basically fully arguing their position. But anyhow, because part of the reason why you have interveners is that if the court does not have an opportunity to hear who will be affected by its decision, it will allow a friend of the court or an intervener to come and to speak on the matter. So obviously, Justice Wagner was of the view that, you know what, everybody is supporting the LGBT position. We don't really need to have wasting court time to basically hear the same repetition of all the same arguments. Anyhow, it didn't matter, because now politics came into play, and Monday morning, everyone is allowed in, because they did not want the heat from the various activist groups. Now, that was a telling sign as we look back at it, and I remember thinking about it at the time. By the way, in the history of the Supreme Court of Canada, nothing, absolutely nothing like that ever happened. The court has always prided itself that it was above politics, that it was always the interpreter of law, and that there would be no influence whatsoever with respect to either politicians or politics or anything. It was simply a legal body. When you read its decision, its final decision with respect to the case, in which they ruled in favor of the law societies, you cannot but say that this is the most political decision ever written by a court in the Western world. This case was influenced by a doctrine known as charter values. And what do I mean by that? In Canada, unlike the United States, we never got our Bill of Rights, as it were. We call it our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, until 1982. You received your charter, your Bill of Rights, in the 1700s. And so it was not until 1982 that we developed and received a charter from our mother country of Britain. So in the charter, you've got all of the traditional freedoms that you can think of: freedom of speech, freedom of religion and conscience, equality, freedom of assembly, all of those things. And so what's happened is that over the years, since 1982, the courts have developed this idea that there's a certain spirit that flows from that document, a certain, they call it a value, a certain charter values that comes through. And so they have the idea that, and the problem is that there's nothing in the Canadian Constitution. And by the way, the Canadian Constitution is much, much different than the American. You guys have one document. We have over 20 documents that are considered the Canadian Constitution. So it's a very complicated type of operation in this country. So when we say Canadian Constitution, most people think of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but no, or even the act that started our country in 1867. No, we actually have 20 plus documents that form the basis of our Constitution. Anyhow, so there's the idea of this charter values. It just kind of permeates in the air. And we really don't know what a charter value is, but a judge will tell us at any given case exactly what the charter value is that is the subject of this particular litigation. In other words, it is a great means for the judge to make up law. And they make it from on high because the 9 of them who sit up on that bench are able to tell us what the law is. And anyhow, so then what happened is this. The law was very clear up until this great decision of the charter values. It was clear that Trinity Western has religious freedom rights that allows it to operate and to be able to operate as a religious organization. It is exempt from the human rights legislation that, but for that legislation, you couldn't even have a church that discriminates on hiring pastors, for example, because that's discriminatory. You're discriminating on religion, for example. You're discriminating on their conscience because one would suspect that a church, for example, would want to have a pastor that is in agreement with the teachings of the church and so on. And so this makes religious life possible to have these exemptions. Trinity clearly fit in that exemption, which is what was the whole point of the 2001 decision. And this court of 2018 did not even, the majority, because it was a 7-2 vote against Trinity, but the majority opinion did not even mention the 2001 decision. That goes against all understanding in English common law that of precedence. So in other words, if a court has a decision that it made years ago, it is binding on the court today unless you can distinguish it. In this case, the court never even distinguished it. It just totally ignored it. It wasn't even there. Like it went missing somehow. But charter values, oh, that's there. Can't see them. You don't really know what they are, but they're there. I mean, it has to be it. I think I should go on a riff on Saturday Night Live or something on the this entire decision. But it really, really is bothersome in so many ways. And one of the ways it bothers me is how it's now being used. So what's happening, for example, is that the politicians have now jumped on this bandwagon about charter values and so forth, and particularly our current prime minister. Anyhow, I won't get too political there, but let's just say that the prime minister has used the arguments of these charter values now and has applied it in dealing with such things as giving out money for various government programs. I just got just a few seconds of what Bob was mentioning about money and about the stipulations that are placed on money in the American scene. And I can tell you that in the Canadian scene, when government hands out money today, the federal government in particular, they have quite a list of requirements when it comes to institutions receiving its money and how it's going to be used, but in particular, how it requires the recipients of that money to apply the government ideologies. And I'll give you an example, several examples. One is the Canadian government has a program every year where they give money to charities to hire students in the summer. So college students is where it's the primary target. And these students are able to work for these charities, gain some work experience and so forth. And what's happened is with this current prime minister, and in particular, as a result, I think, of the court's decision, is that any charity that does not accept the charter values, and those charter values are defined by this government as to including the right to abortion. Now, what's interesting on that is there is no right to abortion in Canadian law. Abortion is simply unregulated in Canada. Abortion can occur anytime before that child ever comes outside of the womb. So in other words, 9-month abortions are not something that is, it's probably uncommon, but it certainly happens in this country. Okay, so there is no regulation, none whatsoever. So the prime minister has the view that he will not allow, for example, anyone to run as a member of parliament in his party unless they're in full agreement with his view on abortion. Okay, he has now applied this charter value on churches who apply for government money to help hire students in the summer. So any church, any church camp that normally would have received in the past, and this has been around for many, many years, will not receive any government money if they do not support abortion. But not only abortion, of course, but all of the various other things that you can think of that would fit within the realm of identities and all the rest of it. Okay, that's one that they have done. The other thing they have done is they just now announced they are going to be bringing in legislation in this country that is going to, or maybe it won't even be legislation because they could probably do it just through government policy. So in Canada, like you in the United States would have the IRS, we have the CRA, and the government has decided that any anti-abortion charity that is yet to be defined, but any anti-abortion charity is not going to be a charitable entity in Canada. So the question that we ask and I have been asking, is okay, does that include the churches who preach a pro-life message? And we don't know the answer to that. But because it fits within the charter values, and also it fits within the legal reasoning of the Trinity Western University case, I think the government will be successful on any kind of challenge in court with respect to that. And that's because what happens now is that when the government gives an approval, as Trinity asked for approval from a government entity, and the Law Society was considered a government actor, then that Law Society is putting its imprimatur on the school, and that we can't have, because that would be kind of like putting, for a Jewish person, having a bit of ham in the soup. You would, spoil the whole batch. And so you're spoiling all of government by allowing that approval. And so therefore, if government gives the approval for a charitable status to an institution that has the wrong opinion and the wrong view of the world, then the whole government is being tainted, you see. And so that is where the Trinity Western University case is taking us. And it's just not going to stop, as we've seen. Anyhow, so even in the current environment we have now, when it comes to government and its policies on vaccine mandates and you name it, I mean, we can go into it. Okay, yeah. So these are the
sorry, Barry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. It was probably just a sign for me to slow down and allow for questions.
Let's give them, just kind of finish off, and we'll give opportunity for questions.
Okay, one more thing. After the decision of Trinity Western, the university itself decided it would no longer require the students to sign the community covenant. In other words, it gave in. Now, they did not reapply for a law school. And I think they're just absolutely burned out through the experience. Yeah. But what was fascinating to me is that even though they gave in, even though they said, okay, we're not going to make this required of the students, they still make it mandatory for the faculty and for the staff. And the commentary in the press and in the law faculties was, that's not good enough. Because yes, we may have argued that you shouldn't make that requirement to the students, but now we want you to move it away from the faculty and from the staff. But even still, some have argued, some top lawyers and not lawyers, but law professors have argued that the problem with a religious school is that it's offering the program to just and in trying to encourage religious students to come to the school. Well, that's discriminatory in and of itself on its face. And therefore, we shouldn't have any religious school that is going to be a law school. Anyhow, that's the end of it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bussey. This, law and politics and churches and the power of tweets. Now, Dr. Bussey has also been a conference director of legal affairs and has been involved in many cases involving teachers and schools, Adventist teachers, Adventist schools. He had some great wisdom. I'm going to ask him to, towards the end of this hour, I'm going to ask him to give one of his most succinct summaries to you as teachers. So he's seen it all. A question. This may seem abstract, but it's the same as we've been studying. The issues of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of everything, really. And sad to say, it's eroded in Canada big time. Question. Someone have a question? Candace, Janina?
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
Because Trinity was not did not make their rule mandatory for the student. I don't think it should have been mandatory for the staff either. Because really, the staff are also students, and in a way, they're people. If it's not good if you're not gonna allow it for this group, why for this one? So I think the staff, have every right to fight that if they want to.
Well,
I mean, either Trinity stand on what they believe for all people, or they take it off altogether. That's what I'm thinking about.
well, I can tell you that there was I think a strategic move on the part of Trinity to remove that for the students, because my suspicion is, and I have a bit more than a suspicion, that the BC College of Teachers would have now come back and said, aha, the Supreme Court has changed its mind. So therefore, we're going to take away their authorization to give an education degree. So that now that would have opened up a whole new fight again. And under no doubt, the Supreme Court would hold true to its precedent in TW in a subsequent case. And they would have ruled against Trinity on that, so they would have lost their education degree. The other thing is that they have a nursing school. And there was a lot of pressure being applied on the accrediting body of the nurses, the BC Nurses Association or whatever it is, to deny accreditation for the nursing school. So I think what they did was they tried to jump ahead of all of that, and they decided, okay, you know what, this is a fight we're just not going to win. And if we want to have a university, we're going to have to give in to this. Now, with respect to the faculty and the staff, Trinity has its back up in the corner now. So is it a religious university or is it not? Can it hire faculty and staff who are in line with its religious teachings? Or should it just simply give it up, close it down, or better yet, hand it over to public authorities and say, here's the university, turn it into another public university? I mean, so these are the kinds of quandaries that the religious communities find themselves in the current environment.
Yeah. I mean, how would you feel if you're teaching in an Adventist school and half your faculty are non-Adventist, non-Christian? How would you feel about that? We wouldn't allow it.
Asking me?
Well, no, I'm asking the class. I'm asking the class, because then what would be the point of having an Adventist school if all the teachers employed were not Adventist? Yeah.
It would seriously impact the vision, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, why would we have a school? Yeah. All right.
I just feel like Trinity is putting themselves in a gem by, eliminating their role for the student, and yet impose it on the staff. Definitely an Adventist school should have Adventist, staff and faculty. Definitely makes sense. But now it's like they second guessing their belief, I feel. Okay, this is what I stood for. Now because I'm being challenged, or now I'm just removing it. You know what I mean? Then others can easily come in and get you to remove this one too, which they impose on the staff. That's just my, what I'm thinking right now as far as that is concerned.
And is quite conceivable that subsequent movements will be afoot to push on that. There's no question. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about you mentioned the power of the LGBTQIA? Is that, it goes on for a while. The power of the LGBT community to influence government, Supreme Court. Why would they be so interested in tearing down? I know it philosophically, I suppose, but why would they be so interested in going after Trinity, a Christian university?
Well, I think one of the points being made was the fact that these graduates would eventually find themselves on the bench.
And they couldn't be, they could be biased against.
And they would be biased. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's part of it. I think also there's another major case that is currently percolating right now in Ontario that is, I think, going to have a profound impact on the law going forward. And it involves a situation where a pastor at a Baptist church just in Mississauga, outside of Toronto, and on a Sunday morning, he announced to his parishioners that he's actually female, that he's actually trans woman. And so subsequently the church split over that, but he ultimately was fired. And now he's suing the church, but they've offered to settle it. He's not interested in the settlement. And all of the major LGBT community activist groups are now behind the case. And so now it's a real approach to determine as to whether or not churches can specifically say that if a member of the community is a member of the church, how then can you discriminate and not hire them into any position in the church? So that's a case that's just getting underway, and I fully expect it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, that I think Trinity is going to have an influence on. And so the problem is that religion is religious communities is where the greatest opposition to the whole notion that deals with the whole LGBT philosophical positions of life and all the rest of it. And so we're in this, as they call it, a culture.
Yeah, there's a case now, or not now, but a year ago in Florida, where a grade 6 teacher in Orlando announced that he was gay, and this is in the middle of the year, and he was fired, of course. And then, several prominent members of the community, the Adventist community, came to his defense. And, that's, I remember when my vice principal came out of the closet, and this is 30 years ago. It's quite a predicament to be in, to be an employer and to then deal with, in this case, a gay teacher. Have you ever found that or seen that, or has it happened in in any case that you know about in your schools? What do you think?
Was your vice principal fired?
No, he left at the end of the year.
Oh,
He wasn't fired. He just left voluntarily.
I see, okay.
I just learned.
But you know, when I was a superintendent in Newfoundland, I had you know, a gay teacher, and anyway, he left too. So
I just learned recently, we had a teacher years ago who it was suspected, but it never came out. But she left on her own. And now there's conversation that she left because the school was giving her a hard time. Now, maybe the school was giving her a hard time. I have no idea. I wasn't a part of that conversation.
sure.
But I feel like we have
So-
a don't ask, don't tell policy. And as long as
Well-
nobody knows about it, then we're okay. But when you openly admit it, then it's a problem.
I think that used to be. I think I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Bussey? And you've been involved in religious liberty and public affairs and conference work. And is this, what is it becoming more open and we're taking more intervention, or is this, what do you think?
Well, I